Hi, it's Mrs. Cunningham. This assignment is called Conflict Creation. I'm going to go over the directions for you. It says, for each of the 4 examples of conflict listed below, create a small example scenario that demonstrates that conflict. The examples can be as short as the ones that you've seen in practice, like we did yesterday. However, the scenarios must be original. That means you have to make it up yourself. No copying any of the scenarios from the other worksheets. After you have created your examples, you need to give the following information about each scenario. You need to list the protagonist, that means the main character. Name the antagonist. The antagonist is the character or thing that is fighting against the protagonist. And then 3, explain how that scenario is an example of that type of conflict. Let's look at the example that I did. I did an example of one that we haven't really talked about, but is similar to person versus society. It's called person versus technology. In this scenario, Frederick loved his phone. He has had the same phone for the past 4 years. It had always worked perfectly, until now, that is. Now his phone doesn't turn on. The battery dies in about 2 hours of use and drops calls all the time. Frederick is becoming increasingly frustrated with his phone's horrible performance. The protagonist in this scenario is Frederick. That's the main character. The antagonist, what is Frederick struggling or fighting with? He's fighting with his phone. Explanation of the conflict. So this is where you kind of summarize the scenario. Frederick is having an issue with his phone not working properly. Since his phone represents technology, this makes it a man versus technology conflict. And that's what you need to do. I want you to write 4 different scenarios. I have assigned you the type of conflict. So the first one, I want you to write a scenario about a person struggling against themselves. You'll type the scenario here. That's where you tell a little story. It can just be a couple sentences. The protagonist, that's what is the name of your main person. Antagonist, well, this one I've already told you who the antagonist is. It's the same as the protagonist. And then explain how this is showing them struggling against themselves. For number 2, I want you to write a scene about a person struggling against another person. So for the protagonist, they should have a specific name. Antagonist, they should be a specific person. Explain how these 2 people are in conflict. Number 3, it's person versus nature. Explain the scenario. Tell a little story. It can be a couple sentences. Give a name of the protagonist. Now, the antagonist isn't going to be a person with a name. It will be a thing, an animal, an epidemic, a disease, a force of nature. That's what your antagonist will be. And tell me how the protagonist and antagonist are in conflict. The last one is person versus society. Tell me a little story. Who is the protagonist? What in the story represents your antagonist? And explain how this person is in conflict with their society. And then you are done. Make sure you turn it in when you